Hello, Lily, and welcome to another live digital conversation here on the Polynesian Eyes podcast. On this digital conversation, I will be a Lone Ranger. Mr. Aotearoa is traveling on his way to the United States of America. We are having a family reunion here, and I believe Mr. Aotearoa is currently in Australia, in the land down under. Hey, Bendis says, I'm here, but no one here yet. Looks like he came in early to the Kava session. But as a good Kava brother, he said, well, like they said, man, if you mix it, they will come. And glad you started the bucket here, Dendis. We came in a little late, did some little show prep, looked through a couple things for bringing up for the discussion here tonight. So Malo Dendis for getting the bucket ready. You get the first cup. Malo Togo. Hey, Polly Prince, Malo, Malo. Welcome to the live digital conversation here tonight. So we were looking at a few things to discuss here in the live digital conversation. We are first going to talk about the USA since it is the United States of America's birthday tomorrow. And this will be our only live digital Kava session for this 4th of July weekend. So we're going to go through that. We have T says, I'm a simple man. I see Polynesian eyes. I tap in. T's, welcome, welcome. Appreciate it. Thanks to Dendis. He got our bucket ready, got us ready for the evening. So just updating everybody what we have on the program tonight. So the first portion of the show, since it is the American birthday tomorrow, we're going to watch a video kind of comparing America's military strength. That was something that we discussed a little bit with Mr. Aotearoa is I think the world underappreciates the impact of the American economy and the American military, and actually how the American economy has enriched the world, and how the American military. Granted, America's made some mistakes, probably did a few things that probably shouldn't have done. Weapons of mass destruction there in Iraq and all that stuff. But hey, no one has a perfect record. But the overall positive influence that the American military has, I think, has a big reason why there hasn't been a World War III lately, especially since World War I and World War II were pretty close to each other. So we're going to watch through that. And then what I do have here on the program scheduled is there are a couple videos of some discussions we've had on social media that our viewers have tagged us in. And so we're going to walk through some of those videos. We're going to have a discussion about a Polynesian / Samoan influencer online, his take on ancient Tongan marriages throughout Polynesia. We'll do a reaction to that. What's his name? I forgot his name. We actually invited him to join the show. He initially said yes, but actually backed out towards the end. Charles Powono. He does some good stuff. He has some great charts and stuff he walks through, covering a lot of Samoan perspective. So that's awesome. But we were hoping to have him, actually a few months ago when we were very early in the program. But we were hoping to let's go to activity here, mentions. And this was from 702 Demon. Tagged us on this video. So that's the video we're going to watch and react to. And this is, what's his name again? Charles Powono. And so he was making, let me share this so everybody can see it. Let's bring this screen up. Meron ko yung screen pa when I'm trying to maybe I should set up my other screens here if I can find them in the garage. All right, let's go to here and share. So this is Charles Powono. He is a content creator online. He does some good stuff here. So he looks like he was making a response to Malafukiu, why Tongan nobility married outside of Tonga back in the day. So he's going to give his take here on why the Tongan nobility married out. And it looks like the comment here is, notice it was always the Samoan women and not Samoan chiefs that were given to Tonga. So it sounds like this person was commenting, which is for a great portion, is true. The majority of the marriages seem to be one way, especially at the higher levels, because the Tu'itonga always and the Tu'ihatagalaua and the Tu'ikanokupolus had to have a Tongan male or lose that line, right? That line would discontinue. So we'll go ahead and kind of watch this this video right here and do a response to it or a reaction to it. Let's double check and make sure we got the sound back up. All right, we got the sound going.
Notice it was always the Samoan daughters and Samoan chiefs that were given to the kings of Tonga, and never a Tongan woman given to any Samoan chiefs. Wrong. Off the back, I'm thinking of Vaito'ifanga, which is the daughter of the Tuitonga. The daughter of the king of Tonga was married to a Samoan dude. But there's a weird little undertone in your comment that you're trying to say a little bit of.
Hey, there are very few far and in between. You can't say that there's a lot that I can think of. Hey, I'm not the genealogical uh, expert here, but the majority of the marriages, let's put it this way, the majority of the marriages that mattered tended to be, especially coming out of Ha'amoa, was women in Ha'amoa coming to marry the Tu'itonga, the Tu'ikanokupolu, the Tu'ihatagalaua. That let's reframe it that way. In the marriages that mattered, it tended to be one way. But hey, okay, that's the challenge sometimes in speaking in absolutes. There's always going to be an exception to the rule.
Something, but I'm gonna ignore it for now because actually what you're
Maro.
bringing up is pretty cool. The reason why Tongan kings and Tongan highly figures, especially the nobility, married outside of Tonga was because of their society and how the familial hierarchy was established and performed throughout the old society and the old way of living in Tonga. Now, for those of you who don't know, Tongan society is really big on the whole hierarchy thing. Chiefs, kings, they're up here. Commoners, you are down here. Actually, you out of frame. You're like way down there. It is actually forbidden for a commoner to actually look at the
Mm,
king, be in the shadow of the king, any of it, any of it. You die for that. But their way of going around this is the thought that, okay, this is our Tapu way. This is our sacred way of living. That our kings are here, our nobility are here, and commoners are down here. We do not mess with them. But you know who's exempt from this? Foreigners. Foreigners are exempt. So because foreigners are exempt from the whole idea of Tongan Tapu system and the familiar hierarchies and societal hierarchies, they're the ones who are brought in from foreign lands to come marry into their families.
I guess I don't understand why he's first thing is saying that Samoa is foreign. Um, that's I guess maybe that's because I don't know. I've seen him do videos that the Tu'itonga comes from Ha'amoa, from the Tu'imanua and Tangaloa. So e- we see each other not as foreigners, but as closely related and under the Polynesian nation. Um, so I don't quite see how he's saying foreigner. I understand that from an outer island, but that's something that I don't think I'm quite on board with that characterization that it was because there was a foreigner there that's why that thing had to happen. Have a comment here from Legrand. Hey, welcome Legrand. Where were the daughters of the Tu'itonga married off to? Also, how were the siblings and their kids of the Tu'itonga treated back in the Tu'itonga days? I mean, they were all obviously of higher rank. A lot of them became nobility in different areas. That's something that was really interesting. Is the term Eiki originally meant you had blood of the Tu'itonga with you. Like that's what drove Eiki in the Tu'itonga and the Tu'ihatagalaua. In the Tu'ikanokupolu age, it was a little bit different, and Xiaoxi Ilayu kind of mentioned this, that the term Eiki took a different definition from his perspective, and that is that the term Eiki was just you were appointed to become a Eiki. And a lot of it was because, I guess, because the Kanokupolu had to bring in a lot of people from Ha'amoa into his area in Hihifo. And my perspective on the reason why he had to do that was the Tu'itonga and the Tu'ihatagalawa were still there, right? And all the Eikis there under and related to them already had nobility and titles. And really, to take a title under the Tu'ikanokupolu may have been a downgrade perspective from their minds. And so the children and the siblings of the Tu'itongas are those extended family. Those are the Eikis, had nobility titles in other areas and intermarried there. And so one thing that was unique that Maui Tekelangi has mentioned here about the Tu'itonga and the Tu'ihatagalaua, what made the Tu'ihatagalaua so successful was that the Tu'itonga, when the Tu'ihatagalaua was instituted, moved to Samoa, to Ha'amoa. And he moved his residence there primarily because it was to ensure that the Tu'ihatagalaua was able to be stabilized. And the thinking behind it was, if the Tu'itonga remains on Tonga Tapu, then no matter what efforts were done to try and elevate and to solidify and stabilize the Tu'ihatagalaua, which once again is a sibling or a child of a Tu'itonga that became the Tu'ihatagalaua line and those descendants there, that if the Tu'itonga remained as a resident of Tonga Tapu, the Tu'ihatagalaua line would never be able to stabilize and be reinforced as the administrative, the political, and the military arm of the Tu'itonga. And so that was the driver behind Kaulufo Nuafekai leaving Tonga Tapu and going to Ha'amoa. Now, after multiple generations, a few hundred years of residing in Ha'amoa, the Tu'ihatagalaua running the empire had been solidified as a head of government, right? As a recognized head of government. And during those times was still intermarrying with the children and the siblings of the Tu'itongas, further reinforcing their Eiki hold and relationship to the Tu'itonga. And that ended up, in my perspective, hearing the history on that, really was a very wise decision by the Tu'itonga, right? Because that really reinforced the Tu'ihatagalaua as a political arm and a strong arm to really manage and lead the empire. The Tu'ikanokupolu, when it's installed by the Tu'ihatagalaua, and some of the conversations that happened with that is the Tu'ihatagalaua, once the Tu'itonga returned, wanted to take a role that was more similar to the Tu'itonga, a more priestly, a more Eiki role, not involved in the administrative or the political efforts of the empire. That's why they created the Tu'ikanokupolu line, which is the lowest of the kingly lines. It was a line that was created to run the administrative, basically the busy work of the empire. But I think there was a critical mistake that could have been done, is the Tu'itonga and the Tu'ihatagalaua remained in Tonga. And that is why Ngata had to import a lot of his followers. I've seen this happen in Tonga, actually, now that I think about it. And what happens is this. I've seen this example where, let's say you have a noble, right, that in a village or in certain estates in Tonga, the heir decides, I'm not going to take the title, right? The heir says, I'm not going to take the title. And so when that's the case, another chief, someone of some relation to the king, is then brought in to take the title. Now, in some of these scenarios, the alliances or the allegiance may still be tied to the bloodline that has been there forever and ever. And what happens, I've seen before in Tonga, the new chief will take some of the land that he has, and he will allow people to, or invite people from either other villages or outer islands or from other estates that he has a stronger following and a stronger allegiance, and bring them and give them residences in the new area that he has been appointed. And that establishes people that are allied to him, that are willing and able to provide resources for him to meet his obligations as a noble, to these functions, whether cultural, political, in Tonga. But he imports people to be able to be the resource for him to meet his obligations of the noble title that's been assigned to him. And basically what it looks like, because the Tui Tonga and the Tui Hatakalaua are the higher lines, and they remained in Tonga, the Tui Kanokupolu can't just go and recruit and bring all those people over and really establish himself with resources to execute his responsibility. He needs to import those people. And, because he has a Samoan mother, he goes to Samoa and brings in a lot of those people, which makes sense because you need people in order to mobilize and to increase resources to meet your obligations. And I'm not sure if that is the primary function that led to the Tu'ikanukupolu being a relatively unstable line. But Maui Tekelangi shares the perspective that, from his perspective, and let me step back. A lot of the perspective that has come out recently is that the Tu'ikanukupolu line, especially towards the tail end, was a Matai system, right? Where there was a voting process that went into place, and some people believe that that was something that was installed from the very beginning of the Tu'ikanukupolu line. Maui Tekelangi shares that that was not the case originally. That the Tu'ikanukupolu from the very beginning was like the Tui Hatalawa and the Tui Tonga. It was father to son, father to son. However, for a couple of reasons, there was a lot of instability in the Tu'ikanukupolu line. I kind of shared that one of maybe the political strain could have come from the Tui Tonga and the Tui Hatakalaua still remaining on Tonga Tapu and always really distracting from the ability of the Tu'ikanukupolu to execute his functions that were required of him. But also, it sounds like there were multiple generations early on in the Tu'ikanukupolu that only had one son. And what happens, one son is what happens is when a father to son succession is not accomplished, then a distant relative from a male line is sometimes provides stability because you can pull from those lines to fill in. And for the Tu'ikanukupolu, there were multiple generations where that didn't happen, where there was only one male. And what that causes is two things. Well, it causes a couple problems. Because there's only females, those females go and marry sometimes into the Tui Tonga or to the Tui Hatakalaua line. And those descendants will pull from the Tui Tonga or the Tui Hatakalaua side of their genealogy and not want to fill in on the Tu'ikanukupolu because it is a lower kingly line. And so it's less attractive, right? It's a less attractive title to take on. So that is one of the reasons why the filling of the Tu'ikanukupolu line many times was very difficult. And there were multiple times where someone was installed as a Tui Kanokupolu, was unable to fulfill the task, and maybe even didn't have an heir. And so multiple efforts of this led to a system where, dang, this kingly line is struggling. We're gonna have to keep picking and going through someone to carry this line. And it took on more of a voting type of system, much closer to the to the Matai system in Ha'amoa, not by design, but by default because of the instability of the line. That's some of the ideas that come from discussions with people who are very knowledgeable on the history, not just the historical history, but the genealogical history as well. And so that is kind of the driver sometimes with the Tuikanukupolu. Anyways, coming back to, we kind of got distracted on that, but coming back to this video here, this perspective that Samoans were outsiders and foreigners and tabu or whatever, I really don't buy into that. The reason why married into Hamo, because that's the same people, all part of the Polynesian nation, still under the influence of the Tuitonga, and so that's the reason why a lot of Tuitongas married into Hamo, and we have examples of the Tuitonga, and don't forget they practiced polygamy back then, so it wasn't like they married the Samoan wife and then that's it. They didn't have, no. The prime example is Tapu and Telea, from the Pai Telea, and his older brother. He married two sisters from Ha'amoa and had a son with both of them, and both were eligible to be the Tuitonga. And he made the declaration, the first of the two that he sees, Ko Uraki Matabe de Siugiai e Tuitonga. And so the younger one showed up first and became the Tuitonga Pai Pai. That's where the Pai Pai Telea was built from. Both of them had Samoan mothers. Once again, it wasn't because they were foreign, it's because it's the same people, it's the same nation. So they weren't viewed as foreigners in my perspective. So I don't quite agree with that analysis there. Though the idea of if you are a foreigner, you are exempt, that idea is true, but that's not the case in my mind in regards to marriage.
This is why there's so many cultures and countries that have so many ties to Tonga, is because they kept marrying outside. This is not really a big thing for other cultures though. Most other cultures try to marry within themselves and stay together, but the Tongans did not do that way. And in all reality, it's a necessity. Because here's one thing, and I'm going to go to the really highest
Ah,
example, the Tuitonga, which is the king of all of Tonga. Okay, so the Tuitonga, if he was to marry a full-blooded Tongan woman, their child, their eldest daughter, would be the Tuitonga Fefine. She's a Tuitonga Fefine no matter what. But because she's full-blooded Tongan with this Tongan mother, she now outranks the Tuitonga. And off the bat, you can't have that.
that's he makes it sound like that never happened. That Tuitonga married, like I said, multiple women, multiple Tongan women, women from Ha'amoa, women from Uvea, women from Futuna, women from Tahiti. There's even oral history of women from Hawaii, Nua, that was married. So this idea that the Tuitonga never married other Tongans, that's just false. That's not true, and it's incorrect. So this idea, once again, it comes back from this perspective that Tonga was one country for thousands of years. Ha'amoa was its own country. Wallace and Futuna and Tahiti and all these islands were separate. No, they were all one people, one culture, and the Tuitonga married to them for political and for economic reasons, right? That was how the Tuitonga maintained relationships with every part of the Polynesian nation, was through marriage there, and also locally. They were marriages to maintain relationships and power within Tonga Tapu as well in Ha'apai and Vava'u. So this idea that the Tu'itonga never married other Tongans is completely false. So that's something that I think is extremely incorrect.
You can't have somebody outranking the king, huh? But it even gets a little
And that's a little bit true. I mean, but that's the reason why, what was kind of seen more of an outsider was marrying into Fiji, right? That was a little bit more considered an outsider, but still, then Tonga had a whole lot of influence in Fiji, and I mean, I was kind of blown away. I had always known about Ma'afu and that influence, but watching the documentary that they made in Fiji, really showing Tongan's influence on the major islands of Fiji, and then looking at Tapumbao and realizing, dude, this guy looks Tongan. That's probably why he reached out to Paul the First and asked for his help in settling the civil war in Fiji. Tongans had influence throughout Fiji as well. So yeah,
deeper because of how the society works. Is that if the Tuitonga Fefine, the daughter of the Tuitonga, if she was to have a daughter with a full-blooded Tongan man, the daughter would be the Tamaha. Okay, she would actually now outrank her mother and her grandfather. She would be the highest ranking person out of those two generations. So to avoid this, the
there's a little
Tuitonga
bit of
always
truth to
married a
that.
foreign girl and they had a
No,
daughter.
not the Tu'itonga, the daughter, right? The sister's daughter or whatever would typically marry a male outside to kind of avoid that. There seems to be a little bit of truth to that, but I'm not 100% prescribed to what he's saying there. Another comment here from Shogun. Doko, what do you think about the cultures in South America that have the women fight bare knuckles in front of hundreds of people? Captain Cook witnessed this in Tonga with the women. I've seen some of those videos, Shogun, and they have it like once a year, I think, and they go all out. I mean, yeah, that's one of many things. We just recorded an episode with Devita Fale, the founder of the Polynesian Ice Foundation, and we talked through a lot of the similarities um, between Tonga and the Polynesian culture, and also Vaihi, which is the Americas. That's the position we take here on the Polynesian Ice podcast until proven otherwise. And this could be maybe another example of that, right? Because Captain Cook does um, record that it wasn't just the men that got into these boxing matches or slash wrestling, it was the women as well. So who knows, man? That could be another tie back to Vaihi from my perspective. So appreciate that, Shogun.
Who was still Tuitonga Fefine, but because of her half bloodedness, she was not fully outranking her father. Okay, and then the Tuitonga
Kind of
Fefine,
true.
just to make it easy and good, because she could still have a full-blooded Tongan daughter, and that Tamaha could still, challenge the whole ranking system. So even the Tuitonga Fefine was subject to marry into foreign powers. That goes back to my example from before with Vaito
Once again, foreign powers. I don't buy into that. Don't buy into that right now.
Ifanga. Vaito Ifanga is the daughter, the eldest daughter of the king of Tonga. So she was a Tuitonga Fefine. So she had to marry outside of Tonga, and she married Tuya Anatama Lelangi. And her daughter was Salamasina, Queen Salamasina. We'll get into that. Wanted to
Yeah, and I mean that's a big deal. That the Tongan that went out. That's how much influence the Tuitonga's blood is, in my opinion. That when they married out, that they're one of the few times Samoa is united happens to be through a woman, which not typical. That's not in the Tongan tradition. It's not typical. There's some exceptions to that. Um, becomes the queen of Samoa, which is she consolidates a lot of that power, and a lot of it they say is because who her grandfather was descending from the Tuitonga. So that's one of the things we were going to watch kind of interesting. This is the theme. The theme I get from watching this, and this is also true of the next couple videos we're going to look at, is when you see some of it's, I call it the one data point analysis. You see something and it looks similar, and therefore you jump on it and assume that it was cause and effect, where it's just correlation rather than cause and effect. And so you jump to certain conclusions, just like is it Charles right there? He says, "Oh, they're marrying out to foreigners," and he has some truth to it, some accuracy in regards to females marrying outside, but that doesn't describe the Tuitonga's role and experience in marrying outside. That was not a driver to it. And then once again, with the perspective of these foreign nations, they weren't. There was no independent country of Samoa. There was no independent country of Fiji or whatever. Those are country borders that were drawn out of colonization. And that Tonga, I mean, for what it is now, Tonga, because of the unique situation Tonga was in maintaining independence, even the boundary around Tonga is European based. But the unique thing is, because of the lack of colonization or the ability to endure colonization and survive, Tonga has a unique position of saying, you know, they have existed as an independent and sovereign society from the very beginning, as the capital of the Polynesian nation. So that is our take on that. The next one we're going to watch, and this part of the show is really based off a bunch of conversations at forth with let's share this tab right here with some of the videos that were showing supposedly, that the Tongan Kava circle and the Taumafaka Kava is from Samoa, and that's another evidence of Ha'amoa being the center of the Polynesian culture and the origin. But that's something that, once again, it's this one layered analysis. Let's see another comment here. Legrand says, "You've seen Charles Powono on his other video toko of the origins of the Chihu. They got it off the toa, what Samoans call the rooster. Is that one of the reasons why Tonga says Hamo?" That's the reason behind it. So it's the Moa clan. Oral history I've heard is, and I've actually, this is kind of funny because shortly after I heard of this oral history, I saw something that kind of stuck out to me because of this oral history. So there was a navigator, Moa, who went to Ha'amoa and resided there, and that became the name why the Tongan family, that group, went. So that's where it's basically the clan of Moa. And supposedly some of the oral histories are there. Everybody, there were some people who had different techniques once getting close. So you have the astronomical knowledge that gets you in the vicinity of the island or the land. And then some people had their own unique skill sets on identifying land. Some people it was, touching the water. Some people is watching the wild birds flying by, and different skill sets. Apparently, there was another one where they used the rooster as a type of navigational tool in helping find land, and that was the symbol of this clan, Moa, and that's why they had that name. And that's why the Tongans call it Ha'amoa. We don't call it Samoa. It's Ha'amoa. That's where we believe the term Samoa comes from. Is the term Ha'amoa, and that it just changed just a little bit and became that. So yeah, we do agree with that a little bit as well. That's where the rooster comes from, and that's where the name Ha'amoa comes from. So let me see this. Are we still? I don't show this yet. Let me bring this up here. Add to the stage here. Can't see it quite well. Hopefully, let me see if I can maybe zoom in a little bit. Are we able? Oh, no, that doesn't work. The zoom in is not going to work. Maybe command. Let's do the command. No, zoom's not going to work. So really, what this is this is one of those other things. Just because someone wrote it down, these people call it quote unquote receipts, and they just go in here and say that's the reality, right? So it shows here the Samoan influence before Tonga was united under King George the First in 1845. The Taumafaka Kava ceremony took place only in the western side of the island of Tonga Tapu at Pangai Hihifo. So right off the bat, we have some incorrect information here. The reason why they say this is because they say that's where the Tui Kanokupolu resided. The Tui Kanokupolu never had a Taumafakava. That's something that the Tui Kanokupolu never had. It was called Ilokava. So to say that that's something that happened on the west side of Tongatapu, the Taumafakava, that is absolutely incorrect. It was always a Ilokava, Taumafakava, or that type of kava ceremony that we're going to walk through throughout the rest of the show was reserved for the Tu'itonga. And there is some history behind that as to how the Tu'ikanukupolu got that kava ceremony. So let's read through the article here and kind of walk through it. I did that, Charlie. I tried the command plus, it wouldn't zoom in. I hate TikTok. TikTok does some weird things. It doesn't allow me to do some of the things I want to do. Um, so it says here there was no crown in those days, and the king sat with his back to a special coca tree, that was something that was tied to the Kuikanukupolu. When it was sent to Australia, where a part of it was used to carve the present of the royal chapel, that when the Tupo the Fourth is like Tupo the Second and the Third, will have his back against part of the same coca tree. There's some truth to that. There's a coca tree in Hihifo that has that history with it. Says the Taumafakava, first used in the 17th century, reflects a Samoan influence. Now, this is the thing that I find interesting, and this is the debate I had online with some of Samoana here, some other I don't know if I really want to call them influencers, because really I call Charles Powono an influencer because he actually shows his face in video. But this Samoana and some other one that's just flags, they're just whatever they are. They're hiding behind something. They're just content creators, maybe is just what we'll call them. But they circle that and say the Taumafakava is influenced from Samoa. Okay, so why do they believe that? They believe that because this next paragraph, Ngata, the first Tuikankupolu temporal king of Tonga. Now that was the first positive, correcting the temporal king of Tonga, because that was the job of the Tuikankupolu. It was to do the work. It's the reason why it was the lowest kingly line. The job of the Tuikankupolu is to do the fatongia of the Tuitonga and the Tuihatralaua. Had a Samoan mother, and the major part of his installation at the same coca tree was conducted by Samoan chiefs and attendants. That may have been true. He had to import a lot of people, but doing what? It tells you it wasn't a Taumafakava. At best, it was a Ilokava. When Ngata's first son was born, the people were called Ha'angata, meaning the issue of Ngata. Well, I mean, the family of Ngata, right? This is the same thing with Ha'amoa. It was the clan of Ngata, the clan of Moa, who had a certain task or a responsibility, right? And so that is the kind of thing that we're talking about here. Is there is a consistency of calling it Ha'amoa, Ha'angata, and also the role of the Tuikanukupolu. So right here, you have this analysis. They say, oh, the Taumafakava started at the beginning for the Tuikanukupolu, and therefore it is a Samoan influence. So I asked the next question. This is what I asked these content creators online. if the Tui Kanokupolu's Taumafakava, quote unquote, is from Ha'amoa, what is the Taumafakava based off of? Right? What is the Samoan Kava ceremony based off of? What is it? What is the pattern? What is the origin of it? Why is it that people sit in the way that they sit? What's the concept behind it? Right? And they go silent. They go silent because they don't even know. They just read this thing. I don't know who wrote this, right? Probably some PhD somewhere who are working on their PhD or their master's did the one line analysis as well. Oh, to Kanokupolu, Samoan. Oh, they practice Taumafakava right now. That must have been from the very beginning. Oh, and because Ngata brought people from Ha'amoa, that must be a Ha'amoa originated task or responsibility, right? That's that's why they think that, and they come to that conclusion. And I'm like, guys, like I said earlier, correlation does not mean cause and effect. Just because you saw A and B happened at the same time, that doesn't mean that A caused B. Just because you see there's a Taumafakava now, just because you know that the Tuikanokupolu had a Samoan, the first Tuikanokupolu had a Samoan mother, that doesn't mean that those things are cause and effect of each other. And they make those conclusions. I've invited these people to come and join us here on the podcast. Come. You know, I got a full-time job. I got to take care of my family. I got other things I do. I can't be sitting there all day and texting you guys. Right? Come and join us. You obviously really believe what you believe. I believe what I believe. Let's sit down and talk through it. Right? If you're really interested in discussing these things and you really believe what you believe, come and join us on the podcast so we can talk this through. We don't even have to debate it. I'm not even saying we have to debate. I just want you to sit here and explain to us, explain to the people of Tonga why they originate from Ha'amoa. I want to hear that story. I want to understand that. I want to understand why you say Taumafakava is from Ha'amoa. Explain to me the history. Explain to me how the origin of the Taumafakava in Ha'amoa, what's the logic behind it, what's the pattern behind it, and what of those patterns we see in the Taumafakava. Okay? That's what I want to hear. If you can explain that to me, I maybe I'll have more respect for your position. But when you just sit here and do this Mickey Mouse analysis and then say, "Oh yeah, this is it, people. This is where it is." I have a couple comments here. We'll go through here. Says God loves you. Hey, good to see you. God loves you. He says, Malo Toko, you haven't lost me, bro. Although I haven't been commenting much, I still been watching, mostly not live, but I'm still with you, Tua. Malo Pito, 100%. Have some really exciting news, hopefully in the next couple of weeks here. God loves you about an interesting development for the podcast as it continues to grow. So appreciate the support. Shogun says, if the Taumafakava was influenced from Ha'amoa, why is there no modern day evidence of it in any of their cultural practices today? They are scraping barrels for it. That's 100% Shogun. That's what I'm trying to understand. Right? This is another. Here's another example. We'll continue on the theme here. I know I get distracted. We're doing the Uncle Donald, the weave. We're doing the weave here. This is why we talk about ruins. Right? We hear how Ha'amoa was the center of the empire and all this. Well, why don't we see the ruins? Right? And we're told, oh, it's just because it was so old, so long ago. I don't know, man. They looked at the Ha'amoa and said the Ha'amoa could be 50,000 years old by some people. How old are you? 100,000 years old? Hey? So that's something that I just, I don't understand. And yet they said, oh, you just cling to your ruins. Take that same idea and tell that to the Egyptians and the Mayans and the Incans and all the other civilizations that have great ruins and tell them, oh, we're not going to believe you because your ruins don't mean anything. Please, that's not even close. Like, you see how silly that position is? These are the kind of the ideas that we're arguing with. You know, it's kind of frustrating when you're typing these things. We got fat fingers of Polynesians. We're not built for these phones sometimes. And then you invite them because they are so dedicated and believe in what they believe. Invite them to come here to talk it through. All of a sudden, crickets, right? Can't find these people. Anyways, so that's the first video analysis that we did here. Here's another video. One of these, drive-by analysis here without really thinking things through. Let's share this. Share this tab. Let me double check it's showing up. Let's walk through this one as well. Here's another one by. Is this one also by Samoan, or is this one? Oh, this is the flag guy. Is this the flag guy? Who did this one? Oh, this is Samoan as well, right? The four papa titles are tuya ana. They each have this video installation of the Ava ceremony. Okay, so I think we got tagged on this saying this is. Oh, I came across this one. One of the viewers may have tagged me. This is explaining the origins of. This is their effort to explain how the Taumafakava originated from Ha'amoa.
Tui Atua sits directly opposite of the Tanoa or Ava bowl. On either side of Tui Atua sits his Tawhai, which are his principal chiefs Tupai and Tano.
The king sits directly opposite the Tanoa or Kava bowl and the Kava mixer or Taukava. On either side of the king or Tui Kanokupolu are two principal Matapule or talking chiefs, Motuapuaka and Lawaki. The space behind the Tanoa is the Toa, where the people gather. The line of chiefs making up either side of the circle is called the Alofi. Here sit the paramount chiefs or nobles and their attendant chiefs or Kaumatapule.
Okay, so the logic here is this. It's just hilarious to me. The logic here is because the Kanokupolu sits directly across from the Tanoa, and that the chiefs sit on the sides of the Tanoa, and that's also what happens on the Taumafakava. Oh, there we go. There's the Samoan influence. And then you tie it back to, oh yeah, the Tui Kanokupolu's mom was from Ha'amoa, and that's the whole thing. That's why all this stuff comes from Ha'amoa. Then I asked, what's the pattern? So what? Why does the Ta'anoa sit directly across from the Tui Kanokupolu or the Tui Tonga? Why do the chiefs sit in a circular shape from there? Well, what's the pattern? Give me the meat. Don't give me your skin level analysis, right? Don't give me this Mickey Mouse analysis, one layer analysis. Tell me how the Ha'amoa Kava ceremony is structured. Why? Why did they come up with that structure? I see pictures of kings where they stand up and then, the lower ranked people on the left and the right in Europe. I see CEOs with their CFO and their COO on the left and the right. Does that mean that they started the Kava ceremony? Right? Does that mean that they start? No, come on. Don't give me this, oh, I see these two things, therefore it must be. Give me a little bit more. This is the reason why when you tell me that the Tu'imanua is thousands of years old, and they go and do the excavation and the archaeological studies, based off of your oral history, it's thousands of years old. They go and do the archaeological studies and they say, oh, it was around for 500 years. This is why there's oral history that says these piles of rocks next to the Tu'imanua's first residence, oh, those are the most loyal people to the Tu'imanua, and they wanted to be buried next to the Tu'imanua. Then they go and dig up those burial sites. They don't find any bodies, but they find Ufi pits. This is what happens when you do the single data point analysis. Okay? So the first thing is I tried to look online, trying to find what is the root or the structure of the Ha'amoa Kava circle, right? Couldn't really find much. The closest thing I could find was expressing the Ha'amoa Kava circle through the Samoan fale, right? And the posts in the fale and the openings of the fale. And that's the best thing I got that I could find online. And that seems to also be the driver behind. Let me see if I can find it. The driver behind, let's bring this up so everybody can see what I'm looking at. Oh, need to add that to the stage. This also seems to be the driver behind the design of the Tanoa here, right? The legs of this is the typical, this is what, when we think of a Samoan kava bowl, this is the typical model or design that we see. And it seems to be close. You see here that the Samoan fales, the posts, right, around this Tanoa design seems to be based off of that same concept of some things I found online that say that the Samoan kava ceremony is based off of the concept of the house, right? And when they're sitting in a circular pattern, right, each chief is representing the post in the Samoan fale, and that's the structure in which the Samoan culture and society is based off of. Seems to be reflected here in this video as well. Now, let's switch that now. So we have that idea of where the Samoan design for their Tanoa comes from, right? And I think let's compare that to, let me see here. I'm gonna upload it. I think it'll be easier if I upload the file here real quick. I'm gonna pull up a file here. We're gonna look at, compare that structure to how the original Tanoa or Kava bowl that Tonga uses, our ancient historical design for the Kava bowl. And looks like none of these files I can open up. So what we're going to do then is present. We'll stop the screen share here real quick and see if I can just share the window. All right, let's share this. Let's see what's popping up. Okay, so this, as we can see here, is what we call Maui's kava bowl. And it doesn't show it quite here yet, but this is the four-legged. It only has four legs on it. And you can see here that the circle within it, you see the reason why the four legs right here is because those are the four cardinal directions, right? North, south, west, east. And I don't know if a lot of people know this, but at the top of the Ha'amonga, there was a carving on top of it, and it was this. It's the double V. See that little circle in the middle? It's the double V, and that is directly representative of, obviously this east to west, here, it's directly representative of the rising and setting of the sun at different times of the year. This double V is not just found on the Ha'amonga. You can find this double V in Egypt. You can find this double V in South and Central America, in the Inca and the Mayan ruins. You can find it all over there. So this is also a representative. These four is also a representative of the Ha'amonga, right? The 4 points of the Ha'amonga, and also a representative of the constellation that is part of Orion, that is on both sides of the northern and the southern hemisphere. That is the primary driver behind the design of Maui's kava bowl. It is directly tied to the Ha'amonga, it's directly tied to constellations, and it's directly tied to the movement of the sun throughout the year, and it's directly tied to the cardinal directions. That is what the Tongan kava bowl is based off of. That is the design. Okay? That's what we're looking for when I ask others, what is the driver behind your kava ceremony? What is it patterned after? We haven't even gotten to the kava ceremony yet. We're just talking about the kava bowl, right? The traditional kava bowl. And the traditional kava bowl, to kind of give a little bit more detail, it is four-legged, has the tano on one side, and it doesn't have a flat edge on its own. It flays and it curves open, right? That's the traditional way of building Maui's kava bowl. So that is what the Tongan kava bowl is designed after, right? That's the thought process there. So when I ask, what is the Ha'amoa designed after? The only thing I could find was the Samoan fale, and we looked at the Samoan kava bowl, and it seems to reflect that. Okay. So let's remove that real quick. Let's go through some of the comments here before we get into the next one, because I don't see the comments when I'm pulling out context or content here. Says Legrand says, you see tuis in Fiji, Samoa, and Tonga. What if the word tui was a title that had to be earned before you could go back to your respective island to rule over it and eventually expand your tui to other islands? What if you had to go to either Tonga Tapu or Manua or whatever island sacred to Fiji to gain the tui title? Just another theory. I mean, that's definitely a logical theory. The position that we would take is the Tui Tonga was intermarrying throughout all the islands in the Polynesian nation. And the way the relationship and the leadership was structured was based off of family ties, which is not a uniquely Tongan concept. I mean, kings in Europe and throughout the world, family relations and power and influence was managed through many times through family ties. What was unique with the structure in Polynesia through the Tuitonga and Tangaloa, like this is a pattern that it wasn't developed with the Tuitonga alone. This was the pattern that was developed with Tangaloa, and actually Tangaloa may have been the one who declared the title Tui. Something similar to what you're speaking here, Legrand, where Tangaloa would marry with many women throughout the islands, and through the practice of Tokatufa. Devika Fale on his thfale.com has an article that walked through this ancient practice where they would marry multiple women, have children, and those descendants would return to their islands of origin of their mother and would become the leaders / representatives of Tangaloa in those islands. So one could make the position here that the Tui title could have come from Tangaloa. Some people say from the Tui Tonga, but when we look at the story of Aho'etu was named Tu'itonga, and that was the title given by Tangaloa. And I'm not saying that the Tu'itonga didn't give that title later on, because the Tu'itonga was the one who was the heir and continued the role and the responsibility of Tangaloa in Polynesia. But I'm kind of just trying to go back a little bit further to say who was the one that we have in oral history that declared the oldest and the first Tu'i title, from our perspective, the Tu'itonga, and that was from Tangaloa. So maybe that's where the Tu'i title comes from, is from Tangaloa. And if your family did something special in the outer islands, maybe that's, you married into Tangaloa and you were given a Tu'i title, and you had your Eiki or Ali'i claim back on the other islands because of the blood tie to Tangaloa, and then later, eventually, the Tu'itonga. So that's kind of my response to that, Legrand. Vex verse, wow, very interesting thing. I appreciate that. Thank you for the comment there. And God loves you says, you're right, the no flat edge, 100%. That is the traditional design for Maui's kava bowl there. Anyways, what we're going to move on to next, and I'm going to bring it up here, and this is what we're going to close the show with, everybody, is we're now going to walk through what the Tongan Taumafaka Kava, which will kind of go, maybe before we get into the details of the layout there, we're going to talk about, before I'm going to open it up just so everybody can see, and then we're going to talk about, and we've covered this, but we're going to continue to cover it and talk about it till the sky falls, I guess. But let's talk about this real quick. So there is an understanding that a lot of people don't have on the origins of the Taumafakava, and the Taumafakava was something that the last Tu'itonga in for the first modern day king of Tonga, which is Taufa'ahau Tupo the first, right? Because as we mentioned earlier, the Kanokupolu only had a not a, and that is primarily because the sacred kava ceremony was only for the Tu'itonga, because the Tu'itonga was the heir of Tangaloa that was installed by Tangaloa to replace the Tangaloa title. Now, this right here, and I'm assuming, let me see that you guys, yeah, you can see the square that I'm highlighting right there is the Fulitaunga. So the Tu'itonga's kava ceremony was called the Fulitaunga. It wasn't a Taumafaka Kava, it was called the Fulitaunga. And the reason why it was called Fulitaunga, according to Tevita Fares' work, and this is, once again, one of the maps and layouts of Tevita Fares, who is the founder of the Polynesian Eyes podcast right here. So this is obviously his work. The reason why it was called the Fulitaunga, because you have to look up to see the heavens, right? You look up to see the heavens, and it's the constellations in the heavens and the movement of the bodies of the heavens that drove the structure of Tonga's ceremony. Obviously, instituted by Tangaloa himself, the founding fathers, one of the founding fathers of the Tongan/Polynesian nation, right? So it was instituted to replicate a pattern that the Tu'itonga was to follow and to base the society of his people on, right? And what was that pattern And what was that structure? Well, that pattern and structure is the heavens. That's why it's called the Fulitaunga. It's the flipping of the heavens and representing what is heavenly on the earth, right? You can take this in a million different ways. That is bringing what's spiritual and implementing it in the temporal world, in the physical world. Bringing what's above, which is good, right? From Hikuleo, from God, from Jehovah, and replicating that good or that order, right? The, the heavens are a representation of order and structure. They follow rules and they know their place. Just like Charles Powono shared in Tonga, hierarchy or structure is very important because God is a God of order. The heavens represent that order. And that's what Tangaloa was instructed to do with the Polynesian nation. It was to instruct order, to don't just do whatever, however. No, there is a rhyme and a reason for what we do as a people, right? And that's what the Kava ceremony was structured after. That is something that you can build a civilization on. That's something you can build a structure for an empire to be on. Science, social structure, cultural practices. You can build a religious framework off of that. This is not something that you just say, hey, that's cool. No, this, in a sense, you could look at it as a constitution. You can look at this as a formal structure of law and order, right? Everyone has a place, everyone has a role. You take your role in life and you follow it. And your sacrifices within your role means something. It contributes to society. This is where that mamahi mea comes from. You learn your role so you can understand your role, so you can fulfill your role, because your role takes sacrifice. And we're not just talking about, oh, the chiefs and the matapules and stuff. They're the only ones sacrificing. It's even that Tonga has to sacrifice. The highest above all must sacrifice, meaning what? They must follow the order. They have a role and a responsibility. If the head doesn't have the dedication, doesn't have the discipline to follow the structure and the order, how can you expect the rest of the body to do so? So we're not talking about the Tuitonga or Tangaloa sitting around eating grapes, just doing whatever they want. No, they had to learn their role and their responsibility. They had to understand their responsibility to the people, acting as their leader, not only in the temporal sense, but in the physical, in the spiritual sense, right? So we have all this structure, this order that we have in front of us. Okay. Let's just look at some of those things. So Tevitafal has done all the work here, name. So why does let's start with this. This is where the Tuitonga would sit, right here, right? So why is the Tanoa directly across from the Tuitonga? Why is this directly across? Well, because of the order and the structure. What is it representing? Well, it represents the equator. That's what that represents. Now, why does it represent that? This is why in Tonga, when they talk about the king, they use the term la'a, or the sun, because that's the road of Tangaloa. The road of Tangaloa is the equator. The road of Maui was the Milky Way. That was the structure that Maui followed and brought to the table. For that, so that's why they sit straight across. Please, brothers and sisters from Ha'amoa, why does the Toa or the Tanoa sit directly across from the person that is honored at the highest seat? Tell me. I've asked, I've looked, haven't found anything. Well, this is what the Tongan Kava ceremony, which I would dare to say, this is the same reason why the Ha'amoa ceremony has them sitting directly across. And where did they get that structure from? From the Tu'itonga and from Tangaloa, who resided on Tonga Tapu. Okay? Anyways, then we have the paramount chiefs at specific locations, right? We have the Fashi Tapu on both sides, Fashi Alofi, that was mentioned in that video. Then we have these openings on either side, where it's called a hala, right? What is that hala supposed to represent, right? So this is what those halas represent. Those are the roads to Pulotu. The road above, right, is the road to Pulotu Aka. That's where, the reason why it's called Pulotu Aka is because that's the rough waters, right? You're in the spirit world, it's uneven, it's not peaceful, it's dangerous waters. It's not a comfortable place to be. Well, when you make bad choices in life, you go to that Pulotu, right? Then you go down to the bottom, the other hala is hala ki Pulotu tu uma'u. Now that represents calm waters, peaceful waters. That represents going to heaven in a sense, right? Because it's peaceful. That's why we have those gaps there, these openings on either side of the toa. That's what it represents. That is why we say, where did this knowledge come from? Where did the Pulotu? And then the whole Kava circle represents the boat to travel to Pulotu from. This is the boat that with the life, this physical life, the journey that we're on, the navigational journey that we're on. That's what it represents. Tell me that that's not important. Tell me that this is not a sophisticated structure for how to run a civilization. Tell me that this structure of understanding that the Kava circle represents the physical boat that we travel through in this life, and depending on the choices that you make, will determine whether you go to Pulotu Aka, a treacherous water, uneasy waters, or Pulotu Tu'uma'u, peaceful waters after this life. Tell me that that's not something that's actually miraculous, right? Like, tell me something of that we're trying to understand from Ha'amoa. Once again, we come back to why are there specific callings out for these positions of the Fashi Alofi and the Fashi Tapu on each side? Well, it comes back to that double V that we saw also on Maui's Kava Bowl, because those also represent the equinoxes and the specific times of the year where the sun moves. This is why this double V was carved on top of the Ha'amoa. This is why those specific spots in the Fulitaunga are called what they are. Right? Now we come back to another interesting thing. You see the double outrigger canoe design? That's also found in the Taumafakava structure. And it also is tied, right? The Tongyaki, right? That's the Tongan boats or canoes. It's also tied to the Ha'amonga in the sky, the astronomical constellation in the sky that covers the north and the southern hemisphere. That is one of the things that made our ancestors very unique. is the astronomical knowledge to navigate the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. That I don't think people appreciate how rare of a feat that is. Everybody up north, easy to navigate the north. You have a North Star, and if you understand the North Star, you can navigate the north. Not a problem. You know where that's a little more difficult? In the south. You don't have a constant star that points your cardinal directions for you. In the southern hemisphere, it's a more sophisticated knowledge. You have to have a thorough understanding of the movement of all the heavenly bodies. You have to have an understanding of which part of the year you're traveling through. That's why the Ha'amonga was built. It tracks the seasons, it tracks the movement of the sun, it tells you what time of the year it is. It tells you when's the best time to travel. It tells you when's the best time to plant your ufi. When is the best time to do certain things throughout the year. That is what the Tongan Kava ceremony is based off of. That is why the Tongan hierarchy is so important. That is why the Polynesian nation extended throughout Polynesia. That is why Tonga was able to endure and to survive through colonization, because it was structure and order that has been built into the civilization and the people for thousands of years. That is why. Okay. So, looking at the time here, we're getting close on time. So, the history. So, this is only for the Tu'itonga. No one has this. You don't go to war and win this right. This is some of the things that you have to, it's given to you. You cannot, this is like getting into heaven. You cannot earn heaven. You cannot beat someone to get to heaven. You cannot buy your way into heaven. There are certain things that are gifts to you, right? Hikuleo gifted this knowledge to Tangaloa. Tangaloa gifted this knowledge to the Tu'itonga. So the question now comes, how did the Tu'ikanokupolu get a Taumafakava? It was gifted to him. Who gifted it to him? The person who rightfully owned the rights to the Fulitaunga and the Taumafakava. And that was the last Tu'itonga, Lauhili Tonga, freely gifted this to Taufa'ahau. You know, this is, you get this one-sided analysis, you know, that really is just kind of frustrating sometimes, is you have people come in and say, oh, Tu'ihatakalaua came in and usurped. That's the word that I usually hear. They came and usurped the Tu'itonga, right? Then the Tu'ikanokupolu came up and usurped the Tu'ihatakalaua. This is the one data point analysis that we're talking about, right? You just see, oh, this guy ran the government, then another guy ran the government, then the other guy ran the government, and from a European perspective, and they're kings, right? Yeah, they're kings. The only way a king can rule from another king is by conquest. Well, that's the European model. There's nothing wrong with it. But don't bring the European model and enforce it on the Polynesian model. Those are two different ways of thinking. This is one of the reasons why Tevita Fara gets frustrated with, you know, academics and stuff who bring in, oh, the origins of the Polynesian culture and history and knowledge is from Southeast Asia. He goes, did you really sit down and talk to these people? Did you really get that knowledge from the people, or did you just go and needed to get a PhD and a MA and a BA and a BS? Let's save that one for last. To feed your family or to find out the truth? Because I tell you, it's probably more to feed the family. There's nothing wrong with that. We understand that. Sometimes you got to do the dance, but know that it's a dance. Know that it's a dance and don't try to make that dance the reality. Okay? Anyways, coming back to the story then. How did we go from Fulitaunga to Taumafakava, which is what we have today? So now we're going to talk about that. Let me, where is this thing? Let me see if I can find that window. There we go. So let's highlight both of them. How did we go from the top one to the bottom one? Right? Okay. The story behind how the Tui Kanokupolu gets his Taumafakava is, we've mentioned it a few times, and this is one of the things why it's important to have these conversations, because my appreciation for the Tui Tonga, Lauhili Tonga, and this is the type of discipline and sacrifice that we talked about earlier. Because of this order and because of this structure, there are sacrifices that the leaders have to make. And you have to understand that power is very fragile, right? We talked about military power. We looked at Russia. We thought Russia was this great thing. They go to fight with Ukraine. We find out, hey, it ain't that great. No, because power is very fragile. And it's very difficult to maintain. So you have Lauhili Tonga, who has ancestor after ancestor after ancestor for about 3,000 years, 2 to 3,000 years, who have followed this pattern, who have been sacrificing and putting the interests of the Polynesian nation as their primary goal of creating order and structure to endure thousands of years to move forward, comes to a situation where Lauhili Tonga sees he's a Christian, he's Catholic, he has high influence and control and loyalty. And then you have Taufa'ahau, who looks to be a talented individual in politics. He's talented in war. He's talented in building alliances. And he's visionary. He understands what is needed to be successful in the future, right? And you have the Tui Tonga there, and he also sees a future. And the future he sees is two futures. You can either go to Pulotu Aka, which means I'm going to be self-motivated, going to be selfish. I'm not going to practice discipline as a leader, as the Tui Tonga, and I'm going to do a power grab, right? Because I'm the Tui Tonga. I'm above the Tui Kanokupolu, right? The Tui Kanokupolu does my dirty work in a sense, okay? There's a reason why Tupo the First never went into Mu'a. There's a reason why Tupo the First, though he abolished the priests of the what I call the middle religions on the outside of Mu'a, that's primarily because they were just worshiping ancestors. But there's a reason why he did not do that to the Taulas in Mu'a and never challenged the Tui Tonga. And the reason is twofold. Taufa'ahau, there's a reason why he has the name Ahau. He was first off cured of a sickness as a young child by a taula of Tui Tonga, Tautai, right? And not only cured, but he was under the tutelage of this taula, of the Tui Tonga. And so he grew up in Mu'a. And who also grew up in Mu'a? Well, Lauhili also grew up in Ua, because that's where the Tuitonga lived, and he was an eldest son of the Tuitonga, of one of the wives. So they must have known each other. They were learning the same thing from the Taulas. And we just recorded an episode with Tevita Falo that will be coming out here in the next week or two, where he talks about Ha'amea, or the Taula, and their role within the Polynesian empire and nation. And we'll have Tevita Falo share those details. But the point I'm making is Taufa'ahau was very familiar with the ancient religion, not the religion of those priests that he abolished after becoming the Kanokupolu, who were not following the old religion of Hikuleo. They were following more a worshiping of ancestors, and of, when you read William Mariner's book about them kind of following familiar spirits, and that kind of interesting situation there. This is so Taufa'ahau abolishes all those, but he doesn't go to Mu'a and abolish the Taulas of the ancient religion, and he doesn't challenge the Tuitonga, because maybe he saw a difference between the ancient religion priests and the middle religion priests. He saw the difference there, and maybe it was his understanding of the old religion that when Christianity came, what he learned from the Tautai, he saw a similarity with Hikuleo, who Kautai could have exposed him to. Okay? Then there's also the political problem. You attack the Tuitonga, who's the spiritual leader of Tonga, and the most Eiki, you run the risk of that action unifying people against you. So it made zero sense for Taufa'ahau to challenge Lauhili. Now, Lauhili knows this. Tupou the First is really, in a sense, military, political, and administrative powers in Tonga were being taken care of by the lower ranks, and never really something that Tuitonga engaged in. And it could rotate amongst whoever they fought over it, blah, 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 whatever. In some ways, he was insulated from that. So Lauhili sits there, but he sees a bigger threat, and that is colonization. And he understands that a divided Tonga is a colonized Tonga. So Lauhili has to make a sacrifice. And what's the sacrifice that he must make? The same sacrifice that Tangaloa made for whatever chaos and challenge that happened amongst his sons with Au'etu. He has to install or empower another power structure to continue the civilization forward. So what does Lauhili do? He instructs his Wharefa to go to the Kanokupolu, who only has an ilo kava, and instructs the Wharefa to institute a Taumafaka Kava for the Kanokupolu. Now, what does this Taumafaka Kava look like? Well, that Taumafaka Kava looks like, for all intents and purposes, almost exactly like the Fulitaunga, except for one thing. He reverses where the Olovaha or the Eiki sits and the Toa. He flips it around. And the Toa is no longer just called a Toa, it's called a Eiki Toa. The only thing I can think of is the Eiki Toa is because some of the people in this could be Tuitonga descendants who are now serving the Kanokupolu. I don't know, right? But what we find here is the same structure as the Fulitaunga of the heavens, of Pulotu, of the cardinal directions, of the equator of the northern and southern hemisphere. You find it in the Taumafakava as well, but it's flipped. Very interesting. If you know our ancestors, they don't do stuff for no reason. Maybe one day we'll find out why Lauhili Tonga decided to reverse the structure of the Taumafakava. So that's what we have now for the Taumafakava. Please, brothers and sisters from Samoa, don't come and do your one layer analysis of just because the Ha'amoa chief sits directly across from the Tanoa, that's somehow the reason and the logic behind the Taumafakava. And then say, oh, see, Tongan civilization originates from Ha'amoa. Sorry, brothers and sisters. Not trying to be rude. Not, some people say, why are you guys causing trouble? We're not causing trouble. We're just trying to talk about the truth. We're trying to find the truth. We're trying to share the information so that people can make their own decisions. Just because you don't like what we're sharing doesn't mean that we're out here trying to cause trouble. Sounds to me that saying we're trying to cause trouble is more of a reflection of your perspective, that it's not about finding truth, it's about not making waves. We're not interested in making those kinds of waves. We're interested in having conversations about the truth. So, oh yeah, that was a long way to answer all of those questions and some of those analysis from TikTokers who try to tell us things that are inaccurate by saying the Taumafakava comes from Ha'amoa, and the evidence of that is that Tatu Kanokupolu was from Ha'amoa, and that's why we have the Taumafakava the way it is. Sorry for having to correct you, but that's just the way it goes. With that being said, looking at the time here, hopefully that was something that was helpful. As I mentioned earlier, Mr. Atearoa is not here with us. He is traveling to the US of A. I think he is in Australia as we speak, but hopefully in the future he will join us. And really want to thank all the viewers. Appreciate all the comments. Sorry, don't have the multiple screens yet. In one of my daughter's rooms, shooting the podcast. Hopefully, I got a little studio that hopefully we can get to in the next few months, but it will take some time. But hopefully, we have a better studio here in the future where we can set everything up. But with that being said, as we always close every live digital kava session, don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. Stay curious. And until next time, peace.